Hello everyone, and welcome back to Band 7201 Data Visualization. In this module, we're going to talk about some very simple visualizations, what makes them appropriate given the data set that you are modeling, and we'll also take a look at how to create these visuals in Microsoft Excel. This week's learning objectives are as follows. So after this module, you should be able to identify and provide support for the use of data at different levels of aggregation, identify and describe the different types of data visualizations, so including simple text, scatter plot, etc. These will be listed in the Storytelling with Data book, as well as on the Storytelling with Data website. You should be able to identify the most appropriate type of data visualization, for example, a line graph or a table for a given data set, and then create an appropriate data visualization in Microsoft Excel for a given data set. Let's first take a look at data at different levels of granularity. So on the left-hand side, we have a very high level of abstraction. This is data that is going to be very coarse. So this will be, for example, a simple factoid. That factoid will be an aggregate or a summary that applies to a specific data set. So the higher the level of abstraction that you have, the less ability that you have to explore the data and to pivot on it. This type of data is very useful in presentation. However, if you want to show trends or take a look at things at a finer level of granularity, you're going to be drilling down into different summary records, and you can go all the way into individual transactions. So on this side of the spectrum, you are able to do more exploratory analysis, create more intricate pivot tables, but this is the type of data that maybe is better left for a report rather than a presentation. So first we're going to discuss the different levels of data granularity and then show how they can be applied in a visualization. Here's a table complete with all the different levels of granularity. At the top, which is the highest level of abstraction, you have the factoid. So for example, 20% of people enjoy this type of music as polled in the year 2020. So this is going to be maximum context at the highest level, and there will be no drill down. So you're having a single data point. This is something that you probably just want to use simple text to display, and we'll take a look at that momentarily. One of the most common, if not the most common, types of data that you'll see in a visualization is that of a series. So this could be sales over time, so different sales quantities versus each year in order. So you're really looking at one metric across an axis. So for example, sales over time. So with this, you can compare a rate of change and see a trend. Does not always have to be continuous, however, could also be a discrete series. Very often we want to compare rates of change. So we want to take a look at different trends, perhaps across time in the sales of different items or across different demographics. For this, we have the multi-series. So essentially we have a common x-axis. In this case, it would be time, but doesn't have to be time. And then common metrics on the y, but that are representing different categories. So for example, the sales of two separate products or two separate regions. So series and multi-series are probably the most common types of data sets that you're going to work with when you are creating visuals. The summable multi-series assumes that you are looking at data that totals to something that equates to 100%. So that you're looking at all the data, and when you sum all of that together, that represents the full set. So and you can count that as 100%. This is going to be really the only case that you want to use a pie chart. So we will actually use pie charts. Pie charts can be used when you are looking at summable multi-series. So you have many different categories, but you have one common axis. So we could take a look at, all the students at GSU and compare which area of study they are in. So we could total all of GSU students and then slice those along the different categories of areas of study. Summary records are also very useful for visualization. These include things like aggregates. So you're looking at, say, averages or maxima or minima. So what is the average sales per year of a particular item? These are things, though, that again can be compared because they're using the same metric, but we are not looking at underlying data here. We're looking at aggregated data. Finally, occasionally we may want to look at individual transactions. Reason being, maybe we have some outliers and we just want to present that to our audience and say, this fell outside of the general bounds of what was going on, and maybe we should take a look into this. So an individual transaction, if you remember from database, you're just looking at one particular record. So if you're looking at census data, this would be the record of just one individual person, their education level, their income, etc. And again, it comes down to what you're trying to get across as to how you would summarize your data and then how you would present that data. But we want to focus on in this module is specifically for each of these levels of aggregation, what type of visualization is most appropriate and how can I create that in Microsoft Excel. So this is a data set from Chapter 2 of Data plus Design. This is actually a mixed data set. So what we have here is several different multi-series. Because for a multi-series, you have to at least be comparing the same thing. So whether that's sales across gender or sales across type of coffee. While we could look at, say, sales of female and sales of decaf simultaneously, it would be more difficult to put that into an appropriate visualization. So this is the data that I'm going to use as a demonstration in Excel for each of these types of levels of aggregation. We will also be recalling your knowledge of whether or not particular data is categorical or it is continuous. So it doesn't matter so much drilling down further into interval, ratio, ordinal, nominal here, but we do need to make note of, is this categorical or is this continuous? Because that's going to help us determine what we can actually do with the visualization. Before we move over to Microsoft Excel, I wanted to show you an example of using a factoid to create a simple text visualization. So again, a factoid is just a piece of trivia calculated from source data. So for example, 36.7% of coffee in 2000 was consumed by women. There are many different ways that you can put this into a simple text visual. Storytelling with Data is going to recommend making the actual factoid, the numeric value, larger than the rest of the text, and then putting into a different color, which we're going to talk about color later, but in this case, blue, what you would like to highlight specifically about that factoid. So here I've chosen to make the number larger and then stack the text and make consumed by women in blue. So this draws the eye to both the number and the fact that it's consumed by women. If we are already listening to a presentation or reading a report about coffee consumption, this middle piece of information is going to be already ingrained in context and will be less important for us to highlight to our audience as we're speaking. Hence, I left it in black. So let's go ahead and head over to Microsoft Excel. You can see that I've taken the mixed data table and have just put it into one tab. So we're going to take a look at all of these different kinds of aggregation. We're going to look at this varied data, several different series, a multi-series, summary records, summable multi-series, and then finally taking a look at what works best in a scatter plot. So scientific data where you have specific data points, Y versus X, that you're trying to show. Now, in the case of varied data, the recommendation is going to be to keep that data in a table. Making visual comparisons on varied data. So varied meaning we're looking at sales across gender here, and we're looking at sales across different types of coffee here. It's not going to make any visual sense to compare these in a chart or a graph. So the best option here is going to be to keep that data in a table. Now, in general, using tables in presentations is not recommended. It's going to be more recommended for a report. But in the case that you do want your audience to be able to look and compare data for themselves, or you are dealing with mixed data like this, where each of the series belongs to a different category, the table is going to be your best option. One note from Storytelling with Data, we're going to start talking about the difference between the verbal system and the visual system in your brain. So the visual system is very, very fast. This is how we take a look at, say, a stoplight and see that green is go. We see the position, we're able to go. We don't have to read anything. We see it turn to red and we know that we need to stop. Visual system is incredibly fast. The verbal system, which is engaged when we are reading a table, is much slower. So there are some techniques that we can use to help the audience get through what they're looking at faster, since they're already slowed down by having to use that verbal system. So what's going to be the best way to format this visually? What we want is for the data to come to the forefront and for the formatting to stay at the back. So let's take a look at a couple different options. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag to highlight the entire set of varied data, and then go over to Insert. I'm going to go ahead and click on Table and indicate that my table has headers, and we'll just see what happens here and work from there. So I'm given this initial option, and it's not too bad. Mainly we just want to make sure that the thickness of our borders is not too heavy, because that will actually take away from looking at the numbers themselves. So we want to lighten up the borders, which we can do further. If we are looking at this in Excel, it is helpful to have the different colored highlighting row by row. However, if we're going to port this into a presentation, we probably want to get rid of that. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the table again and go back over to table design, which should pop up after I highlight it. Go ahead and pull the drop down and see if we can find something that's a little bit better for presentation. Looking at these options, I'm actually not seeing anything that's going to help us out. So what I'm going to do is actually switch the format back to the regular light format, but we still have our table. What I'm going to do from here is highlight the first row and just add a border on the bottom. So there are multiple ways to accomplish this. I'm just going to right click the area and then go over to this tab here and choose bottom border. That'll give me a bottom border. So I'm going to highlight the years and actually send those over to the right so that they're in line with the rest of the data, so that when I copy it over, it doesn't look all strange. And I will also increase the font size slightly up to 14. It's a little more visible by double clicking the lines between columns. And now I'm going to highlight the table and copy it, and I'm going to move it over to PowerPoint to see what it would actually look like in a presentation. So here I am in PowerPoint. I'm going to right click the page and choose Keep Source Formatting. And here I have my data table. Now again, it's not recommended really to use tables in presentation, but we happen to have varied data here, so we don't really have a choice. The other reason for using a table in presentation is if you really want to take your audience line by line through the data. The other type of table of interest is that of the heat map. So heat maps are useful when we want to visually highlight parts of the table so that our audience's eye is drawn to them. So let's go back and create a quick heat map using this varied data set as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the data down so that I can create that heat map. I'm going to highlight that second table, and to create the heat map, I'm going to use conditional formatting. I have many different options with this. I'm going to take a look at the color scales and see what it has to offer me. Here there is a green to white color scale that indicates the more green it is, the larger the number. I think I like that, but I'm going to change it to blue actually. So first thing, I am going to select this green to white color scale that highlights the greater values first. And then I'm going to edit it because we need to be mindful of accessibility here. Green is not a great color to be using since some people do have issues with that color and their vision. So with it still highlighted, I'm going to go back to conditional formatting and go down to manage rules. I'm going to double click on the rule and keep everything the same, except I'm going to change this drop down to a blue. So I'm just going to use the blue that's the theme color here and hit OK and OK again. And now I have it highlighted in blue. If I wanted to get extra fancy on the darker blues, I could change that text to white. That would really also make it pop. But here's an example of a basic heat map indicating greater values with shading. Again, the recommendation would be to use the color, the light blue. I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to PowerPoint again as well. So right click and keep source formatting. And now you can see my two options for a table. So just the regular table with minimal borders and then the heat map. I did want to also point out, so all of our values here are continuous values. So one of the things I want to think about when I'm looking at this data is what kind of variable is the independent variable, or several independent variables, and what kind of variable is each dependent variable. So the dependent variables here are the values for each category of sales. So every single one of these is a numeric value, which means that it is a continuous value. I'm simply just going to make note of that here. We're going to talk more in detail about that once we get to series. For my independent variables, that's going to be what I'm measuring on. I have total sales, I have gender, and I have type of coffee. These are a mix, which is the other reason that a table is appropriate for this data. So total sales is continuous. However, the categories of gender and type of coffee are not. They are discrete or categorical. So I really do have a mix here and require a table to coherently present all of this data together. Let's go ahead and take a look at the second tab. So this is our first series. Again, this data is coming from Data Plus Design, Chapter 2. So here I have total sales of coffee by year. The other thing to point out, by the way, is that if you have just one type of dependent variable, meaning that it's all sales, you can indicate that to your audience in context or as a title rather than putting tons of dollar signs in the table or the visual. That will clear up some cognitive space as well. So here we have one independent variable, that is year. It is a continuous variable because it is time. And our dependent variable is that of sales. So sales is money, and that is also continuous. Because I have two continuous variables, I have several good options. I can do a simple bar chart, so vertical or horizontal bar, or because I do have two continuous variables, I can go ahead and take a look at a line chart as well if I want to see a trend. So let's go ahead and take a look at a bar chart first. I'm just going to click and highlight the data. I do need to have, for this to work in Excel, my independent variable on the left and my dependent variable on the right. I'm then going to go to Insert, and under Charts, I'm just going to click Insert Column, and I'm going to go down to More Column Charts and take a look at what we have. So it's suggesting the clustered column. That's not actually what I want. Clustered column would be if I had two separate sales values for two different things per year. That's going to be a multi-series chart. For just a regular series, I'm just going to select this basic column chart here. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and you'll see that it gives me the following. So again, that was just the basic column chart when I selected the chart design. It has done several things for me. So it started the y-axis, the vertical axis at 0, which we like. We don't always have to have that. But in the case of this kind of series and this kind of bar, we have to have that 0 baseline. The 0 baseline allows us visually to compare these lengths with our eyes and have them make sense. So we need that entire range to be there for this to be accurate. Looking at the x-axis, I'm also satisfied we have each year represented. The vertical chart was a good choice for this one because the titles of each category for the year are not very long, and they do fit just nice and succinctly under each of those bars. The other thing I want to check is my title. So total sales of coffee, I'm satisfied with that. That seems to make some sense. I don't want it to just say chart. Now we do have an inherent ordering here, so we don't want to just reorganize these bars. Like for example, if say there were more sales in 2001 than 2003, I don't want to bring them out of order because the order of the years is meaningful to us here. If these were categorical on the bottom, we might want to reorganize this by height if it weren't already done so. A couple other considerations, I may want to add a label to indicate that this is in fact dollars if that is not clear. I can do that by adding an axis title. So if I check that, I'm going to get rid of the bottom one because I think that one's obvious for time. However, if I want to on this y-axis, I could change this to sales in US dollars. If for some reason in the context we weren't sure what unit we were using. I actually don't like that as much as I'm going to get rid of that, just putting it simply in the title. So total sales of coffee in US dollars. That actually makes that cleaner. Now again, you guys are analysts, so you're used to seeing these lines and all this kind of thing, and probably used to this format. We're going to edit this a little bit based on recommendations from Storytelling with Data, as it would be better to show this visual in a presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and try to right click on these grid lines so that the grid lines are highlighted, and I'm going to go to Format Grid Lines. What I'm actually going to do is get rid of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and say no line. Now, depending on what you're trying to get across to your audience, you may or may not want to do this. If the point is just to see this growth, then I would say get rid of the lines. If there's a need to see the individual tick marks and the values on the left, then you're going to want to keep them. In this case, I think we're just trying to get across that there is an increase in sales. I'm using some license here, and so I'm going to get rid of those marks. Two other recommendations, things I'm going to do. See how that does clear that up so it's easier on the eyes. I am going to make the gap width a little bit smaller so that the bars are a little bit closer together. You don't want them too close together, but I do want them a little closer than this. So what I'm going to do is click on the bar itself, and then if it doesn't bring up Format Data Series, I can right-click the bar and go to Format Data Series. I'm going to click on the bar icon over here, and then just adjust that gap width. I'm going to take it down just a little bit so that they are closer together. Now that looks a little funny. It'll look less funny if I simply make the chart a little bit smaller. And this is kind of the artistic portion. I'm going to go ahead and increase the gap width again slightly, so use your best judgment. The last thing I'm going to do to really make this thing sing for a presentation is I'm just going to put the values directly on each column. So I'm not going to bother with this y-axis scale at all. We'll take a look in the next module at how to format this in Tableau. It's actually a little bit easier, but I think it's important for you to know how to do this in Excel as well. So adding a data label is quite simple. I'm just going to right-click the bar and say Add Data Label, and you'll see that it adds the actual value of the sales right on top of the bar. Now I don't need these axis labels at all. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click this axis and just delete it. So this has changed quite a bit over time as we've been working on it. This is our final result. So we do have closer bars. We have bars ordered by year, and we have the data labels on top of those bars. We made sure to put the unit in the title. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it over in PowerPoint. So I'm just going to right click. I'm going to paste this one as an image because that makes it quite simple. And I can now use this in my presentation. It's very bare bones. If I wanted to, bold up the text, I could do that as well. But this will at least get you started in terms of formatting it for maximum readability. So I do want to show you one other thing you can do with this data. We have the magical property that both the independent and the dependent variable in the series are continuous. This gives us permission to use the line chart. Now in this case, we don't have several different dependent variables that we want to compare, but it doesn't matter. Maybe we just want to see the line chart to see that trend a little bit more cleanly. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the data again and go to Insert and pull the drop down on this Insert Line or Area chart to take a look at 2D line. Now again, it's giving me the clustered option first, which is not something I want. Never use the 3D. Let's just throw that out there at the moment. Don't do that. Let's go to More Line Charts. And all I want is just the simple line chart. So this is clustered. That's not what I want. I don't want to see a comparison. So it's treating year and total sales of coffee as two separate series, but we only have one series with the x-axis being that of the year. So I'm going to select this visual here, which is our simple line chart, and hit OK. I'm going to go ahead and move our pretty little bar chart off to the side so we can focus on our new line chart. So let's first just add to the title like we did on the other one. So total sales of coffee in US dollars. Now the nice thing, one of the major differences between the line and the bar chart is that you see all this space down here on this y-axis because we started it at 0. On the line chart, we don't have to start that axis at 0. So it's perfectly fine for us to adjust this axis size as needed in order to really focus on the data itself. On the bar chart, we have to start at 0. That is an absolute must because we could end up manipulating our audience in a tricky way if we don't do that. The media does this all the time. They don't start their axis at 0 and we run into manipulation issues. Now, depending upon what point you're trying to make, you're going to format the line chart a little bit differently based on those needs. To start, let's go ahead and shore up this space. So in other words, I'm going to really try to get this axis to just showcase the data. So if you don't have this format axis panel after clicking on the y-axis, go ahead and right click it and do format axis. So you'll see it has a min of 0 over here right now. We're going to go ahead and eyeball this and increase it to, let's say, 19,000. I click off. Yeah, so you see how that makes us see the trend much more clearly. I'm also going to change the maximum as well. So let's lower that a little bit so we close this gap. I'm going to change it to 41,000 as a test. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe I want it just a little bit higher. Say like 42. Yeah, that'll keep my eyes. I don't know. Either way is fine. Let's do 41. Really emphasize this rate of change here. So my years are fine. I might actually want to make these years a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to click that, go to home, and increase that font size just overall. I have a couple of options here. So it might be that I do want markers on each data point. Visually, it's going to be cleaner if I don't have those markers, but let's just kind of, for the sake of argument here, look and see that the rate of change actually increased after 2001. So if I want to highlight and say, you know, something happened here in 2001 that we started to see greater increase in sales, I could add that plot point there. So since we removed 0, I'm definitely going to keep these labels here. And I'm also just going to add data labels to the line. So I'm going to right click the line and say add data labels. Can drag these a little bit for the sake of visibility. I did not include data markers, but I can also do that if I feel it's necessary. I am, however, going to get rid of these grid lines. So I'm going to right click the grid lines, format grid lines, and say no line. You see that gives me a lot of extra space to work with. Now I can drag these values to fit a little bit better on the chart. I'm going to go ahead and add those markers. So just going to click until I get the data series, right click, format data series, go to the paint can and choose marker. And then marker options, I'm just going to say automatic. If I want to make those bigger, I can choose built in and just increase the size a little bit. Again, this is going to depend on what you're trying to show. It may be cleaner without the markers, but you might want to see the markers for some reason. I think we're now ready to take this over into PowerPoint. So you can see the differences looking at the bar chart and the line chart. Again, this only worked because both of our variables, our independent and our dependent variable, were continuous. That allowed us to create this trend line and have it make sense. If I were just showing an upward trend, I might choose the bar chart. If I wanted to show this dip here where we started increasing a little bit more quickly, I would probably go with the line chart. I'm not, however, going to mix and match by putting a trend line on the bar chart. That's not recommended. So we go ahead and copy this over. So right click and paste the image. And now my visual is ready to go for presentation. Let's take a look at another example of a series. So this is also from Data Plus Design. Here we have time for a first degree burn in minutes and seconds and instantaneous versus water temperature in Celsius. So we do want to do a little bit of cleaning up on this data before we actually put it into a visualization because Excel will not process seconds and minutes simultaneously. We're going to need to convert, and then we can use whatever data labels we like later. Now we do also have the two options here of the bar and the line. Reason being that we have both a continuous independent and a continuous dependent variable. So because the water temperature in Celsius, that is continuous interval, and time is also interval continuous variable. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and recode this. So I'm just going to copy this title over. I'm going to keep minutes as the base. So we'll do 35.1. I'm going to have to do the formula here. So 5 divided by 60 for the number of minutes, 2 divided by 60, and 1 divided by 60. And then this last one, instantaneous, well, that's just 0. So I now am able to use this in a visualization that Excel will be able to process. I'm going to go ahead and switch the order of these so that we have the independent variable on the left and the dependent variable on the right that we want. And let's take a look at this. So I'm going to highlight the two columns, go to Insert. Let's do our bar chart. So I'm going to click on the column, more column charts, and then just select this one here. So you see that we have an inverse relationship here that makes sense. You know, the hotter the water is, the more likely it is that you're going to be burned more quickly. Hit OK. Now, actually looking at this, I can tell that it's very difficult to actually see the data. So this tells me right away that I probably should switch just to a line chart. So don't even bother with this because this is meaningless. I can't actually see the values. Even if I were to blow this up, I still wouldn't be able to see it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to right click the chart, change chart type, head over to our line, and it suggests a simple line. That's great. Hit OK. So now with the line, again, because both variables are continuous, we are allowed to do this, and it's going to make it actually possible for us to see all the data. Now there's a lot of playing around with this that I can do, so I can get these labels back so that, we can see minutes and seconds at the same time, even though Excel's interpreting just one of them. So let me go ahead and I'm going to right click the axis and go to Format Axis. I'm going to leave the minimum at 0. This is really important. I'm going to adjust the maximum slightly to 36 and then make sure that that minimum stays at 0. You can include negative values, of course, if your data has negative values. But if you don't have any, we're going to want to keep that minimum at 0. I'm going to go ahead and while I'm here also get rid of these grid lines. So right click and delete the grid lines. Here it's important that I label the bottom axis, so I'm going to give myself some axis titles. I'm not going to use the vertical one, but I am going to use the horizontal one so that this is temperature in Celsius, like so. That's important for us to see so we know what we're looking at. And then what I'm going to do is actually right click and put data labels on there, but what I want to do is I want to change the data labels so that they're not the numbers that we gave, because it's going to look better if we actually have the original labels. So again, the issue was that we had to use the values in order to generate the chart, but the labels I'd rather have 35 minutes, 1 minute, etc. So let's see if we can manage that. So I'm going to right click and do Format Data Labels, and then I'm going to choose Value from Cells, and I'm going to highlight C2 to C7 and hit OK. I still have the value checked, so that's why it looks a little crazy. I'm going to uncheck value, and now I just have the original data labels. So now I can kind of drag these up. You see that it kind of provides a little line over to it, which I might not want. Give myself a little more space on this. And now since I have it labeled, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this axis. I'm just going to delete that. So a little bit more cleaning. I'm actually going to get rid of that little line. And this is about, I think, as good as this one's going to get. So I can add markers because that might help a little bit. But this way we can at least see the trend is that, you know, the hotter it is, that the more quickly you're going to get burned, first degree burn. And we can read this in a way that is human readable to us, but also have the line correct based on the values. So let me go ahead and add markers. Just click, right click the data series again and format data series. Marker and marker options give us a built-in. And I think that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so I'm satisfied with this. We have the time labeled correctly. We have the line, which is meaningful, more meaningful than not, you know, the bars, because we couldn't really even see the small bars. And we have a label on our axis. I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to PowerPoint. Right click and paste as an image. Again, this was possible because we had two continuous variables. Let's go ahead and look at one last singular series. So here we have a list of planets. This was done at a time when Pluto was not recognized as a planet, so we're going to roll with that. And the mass relative to Earth. So since this is a ratio, we don't have a unit, and that's perfectly fine because this is based off of Earth. So the first thing we need to decide is what kind of variables we have. So the mass relative to Earth, this is continuous. So we have a continuous dependent variable. Now the independent variable, this is categorical since each planet is different. So this makes things a little bit more strict for us. Independent variable is going to be discrete or categorical. So I'm going to want to try the bar here again, so the most basic, because I do have that categorical variable. So let's go ahead and highlight the data. No cleaning needed here. Insert. I go to my column. Whoops, that's histogram. Go to my column. More column charts. I just want the simple column. I do not want the clustered column, so just this one. Hit OK. And here we can see, again, it's difficult to see the differences. So as I'm looking at this, I'm not really sure that anything other than a table is going to give me something that's readable. Let me see if I can tweak it a little bit to get there. So what I'm actually going to do first is I'm going to swap this from a vertical to a horizontal bar. So I'm going to right click, change the chart type, and we're going to make this a bar chart. So Excel calls them column versus bar. Storytelling with data, we call them bars regardless. It's just vertical or horizontal. So let's go with this simple one here. I'm going to expand this. What I'm going to try to do is, since I have more space horizontally, I'm going to try to at least get it so we can see the difference. So whether or not I'm going to be successful is difficult to tell. And again, it kind of depends on the audience. So this is scientific information. And if the point of this is to really show how much bigger those further planets are than we are on Earth, then this is certainly accomplishing that. So I think this is kind of a special case because of the context that something like this, where these little values, we want to see that kind of perspective on this. With business data, we may not want to see that kind of relative data like that. I'm going to go ahead and say that this will work out because of the context, and see if we can clean it up just a little bit. Another option on this one might be, however, to make a clustered bar or column with just each planet compared to Earth. This one's tricky, so I just want to give you an example of looking at categorical data. That's a special case. So let's right click this axis and format it. I'm going to bring the maximum down to about 320. I'm going to remove the grid lines. So I'm still not sure if I'm satisfied with this. I think what is going to basically need to be done is, so we're going to keep it horizontal because these labels are longer. I'm just going to get rid of this x-axis entirely because I think we're just going to put the data labels right on the bars. So like so. So I'm going to right click the bar and add a data label. And then let me capitalize Earth here. And then if I can, I'm just going to delete the data label on Earth because Earth is 1. So this will allow us to compare the ratios a little bit better. And then let's shore up the distance between these bars. So go ahead and click on the bar icon and minimize that gap width a little bit. So I think that's much improved. Again, this is very specific scientific data, so it's kind of a special case. But generally you want to use horizontal bars when your labels are longer and you have categorical data. So we're using the bar chart because we do have categorical data that we want to compare continuous dependent variable on. And because it's this special scientific data, we're just going to eliminate the label on Earth and put all the other labels there. This allows us really to see the difference between Earth and Jupiter and to highlight that. I might reorganize these so that Mercury is first, since it's the order from the sun. That's, again, more art than science. So I'm going to click the axis and choose categories in reverse order. So now we got Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, etc. And again, it's a ratio, so I don't need a unit label. I think I'm satisfied with that. So let's go ahead and copy it and put it in the PowerPoint. Right click and paste as an image. I'll probably make the text a little bit bigger, but the general idea and the fact that we had categorical data, those things are there. Let's take a look at an example of a multi-series. So we're going to revisit that first degree burn data again. What we're looking at here is a comparison of how quickly a person can get a second and third degree burn versus a first degree burn looking at the same temperature. So multi-series, you're using the same values on the x-axis and comparing values that are of the same type but different categories on the y-axis. Lucky for us, these are both continuous, so I'm going to use that line graph. Line graphs are great for comparisons on the same x-axis. So many times, you see like sales of different categories over time and compare the trends in the lines. This is very similar to that. So the first thing I need to do, of course, is recode this to go ahead and do that. So we'll put it all in minutes. So this is going to be 35, 1. I could copy it over, but 5 over 60, 2 over 60, 1 over 60, and 0. Then on this side, 45, 5, 25 over 60, 5 over 60, 2 over 60, and 1 over 60. Okay, so I do need a little bit more organization here. I'm going to move some columns around and copy the labels over. So this is now organized the way I need it to be. If I want to be safe, I can highlight this, copy, and paste as values just to make sure that it's flat with no underlying formatting for Excel. And now I'm ready to go ahead and make that stacked line chart for our multi-series. So the goal here is to get a stacked line chart. However, it's a little tricky to do that in Excel. So the route I'm going to take is to tell it that I want a scatter plot, and then I'm just going to connect the dots. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the data, go to scatter, and you'll see that when I do choose scatter, it actually suggests what we want. So stacking, using the water temp on the x-axis and then stacking the two y's on top of each other. So we can manipulate this from here a little bit more easily. Now I do want to keep that y-axis set to 0. The x-axis, however, since it's interval, I don't need to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do so that the data is more visible is right click, go to format axis. So I'm going to go ahead and back that up to, what's our lowest value? It looks like 46, so maybe 45. And you can see the data already starting to stack a little bit better. The max is pretty good. I'm just going to leave that for now. Let me go ahead and get rid of these grid lines. So delete both sets of those by right clicking. And now I can kind of start to see the data a little bit better. Let's go ahead and add a chart title. So time to first, second, and third degree burns. And then I'm going to want that x-axis label so that we know it's Celsius. So I'm going to add a chart element, add both axis titles, and get rid of this one. Let's change this to temperature in Celsius. And again, the goal here, so first I need to connect these, and then I'm going to put data labels on. But I may change my mind on that, since really, if the important thing is showing the difference or the lack thereof, then we don't really need the data labels. But let's take a look at what we have. So I like this legend. I think it's perfectly fine. We could probably reformat it, but let's leave it for now. So let's go ahead and add connections to these lines. So I'm going to right click the series and let's format the data series. So I'm going to click the paint. What I do want is I want lines. So I need to add that solid line. I'm going to keep the color as orange for now to match the markers that it had. Same thing here with the other series. So right click, format data series, click the paint can, add a solid line. This one I want to be blue. Okay, so we at least get some idea of what's going on here. In this case, I might actually want to get rid of the markers because it would be a little cleaner. Let's go ahead and do that just for the sake of argument on this one. So I'm going to click the series and go to marker and say marker options none. Same thing with the other line, marker options none. And so now I just have the two lines. I think if I were presenting this data, I would really show that, okay, the difference is not that much, that would be my story here, is that really it doesn't take that much longer, especially if the temperature is very, very high, to get to that first degree burn than it does to a second and third degree burn. So we're talking really, really minimal. So while there is a difference, you really just want to be as safe as possible. That would probably be my message. So some points of contention here, we could add data labels. We might not. It kind of, again, it depends on what you want to show. I think in this particular case, what I would do is actually add the vertical axis title and make it known that that was minutes, so time in minutes. Reason being that I think I'm really just focused on the fact that the difference is not that great, and that I think putting data labels on this will make it too sloppy. Some other artistic choices. Let me see what we can do about this legend because it's taking up too much room. Right now it's on the bottom. Left click it and it brings up this menu. Let's put it to the right and see if that helps us a little bit. Show the legend without. Okay, let me click the legend. Let's uncheck that so that we can see the legend on the chart. I think this is getting better. So here we can clearly see what the colors are. We have all of our labels. I might even pare this down a little bit, but in terms of comparing two series, I think this is a great start. The point here was to show that there's minimal difference, so we don't need the data labels. You'd only put data labels on if you really wanted to show in particular one specific thing on that line. I kept the time in minutes on the left, which again, you could probably argue that we take that out and do something else. But for now, I think this is as good as we're going to get. I'm going to go ahead and copy this over to PowerPoint as our multi-series example. Moving on, we have here an example of summary records. So summary records meaning like an aggregation, an average, a minimum, a maximum, etc. So here we have the average number of, I believe it's cups of coffee consumed by a person based on their gender each day. So if we take a look, our independent variable, which is gender, is categorical, and our dependent variable is continuous. So we're going to have to use a bar here, so horizontal or vertical. Let me go ahead and just highlight the data. This one's pretty simple in design. This is just to show you an example of those summary records. So insert, go to our column, more column charts. So in this case, actually we can use a clustered column. So because it'll cluster for female and male patrons, the regular, the decaf, and the mocha together. So we're going to select this option and say, okay, take a look at how that looks. So we have here is the average of each type, and we have female and male comparison. So we do need this bar because it is categorical. These labels are kind of long, so I might suggest we switch this to a horizontal presentation. So let me go ahead and actually do that. So right click, change chart type. Let's go to bar and hit OK. Now it has organized it looks like in order of female consumption because that's what was on the top. I can choose to swap that if I would like. But first let's add a title. So average coffee consumption. I'm just going to leave it as average coffee consumption for now. We'll see if we have data labels or not, if we need to change that. Let me go ahead and get rid of these grid lines. So delete those. I'm going to increase the size of these bars. So click the bars, make sure they're all highlighted. Click the bar over here to format and minimize that gap width. Then I'm going to click the legend and I'm going to move the legend over again, similar to how we did before. In this case, I right-clicked the legend and went to Format Legend. Let's put it on the right. And I'm going to uncheck Show the Legend without overlapping the chart so it doesn't make the chart smaller. I'm going to put the data labels directly on the bars. So let me right-click each bar and do that. So add data labels for each series. This will enable me to completely get rid of this axis. So I will just delete this axis. Gives us some more space. And this is pretty good, actually. This is not too bad. So it depends on what you're trying to put the emphasis on in terms of whether you'd want to reorganize the bars or not. In general, you do like to see them ordered in some way based on size or based on if you do have continuous labels on the primary axis, that they're in some kind of order. In this case, these categories are not in any particular order. And we've organized this correctly so that we can see comparison of male and female consumption for each category. So contextually, we may not need to put in cups on this chart since we're doing a presentation and we can simply say that. I could make these labels a little bit bigger for readability, but other than that, I think we're pretty good on this. I'm going to copy it, right click, and paste it as an image in the PowerPoint. Okay, let's head on over to the Summable multi-series. So the Summable multi-series, this is a series that when you are looking at the entire category, that you're treating the sum of all of these points as 100%. Summable series is the only time that you might be able to use a pie chart. And the only time you're going to want to use a pie chart is if you are showing a part to whole relationship. So in this case, we could show percentage of male to percentage of female. So we're only focused on comparing those two categories across sales. What we would not want to do is say have one pie chart for female and one pie chart for male, even though we have 100% total for each. If we want to compare male to female, we definitely want to go with that bar chart and not use a pie chart. So really the only case here where you'd have a pie chart is if you were looking at a comparison of male to female and counting the entire sum as 100% for sales. So we're going to look at both examples. So the simplest case here, we're just going to make the bar chart first. So I'm going to copy this data down and add the year. So I'm going to avoid including the total sales at this point. Now actually Excel is going to be wanting to do something interesting with this data. So to make sure I get what I want, which is a comparison of male-female in a clustered bar, I'm going to first make it so that year is its own column and that I'm comparing the two male and female side by side. So in order to do that, let's see, can I copy this and transpose it? Yes, so I copy male, I copy female. I can right click in the cell that I want it to start and transpose. Okay, so I can go ahead and delete this. All right, from here, so the goal here is a clustered bar. I'm going to highlight all of this data, go to insert. I want year to be the base, so let's go to more column charts. And if I take a look at the options here, this is the one with year across the bottom. That is what I want. So let's select that one and hit OK. So this is the one it was intelligent enough to say, okay, she wants to treat the x-axis as the year, and then compare male and female together for each year. So many things we can do here, including things that we've already discussed. Let's add a chart title. So this is total coffee sales by gender. Depends on the chart. So for years, I think the vertical bar is okay. We actually could do a stacked line here as well. Even though male and female are categorical, that total sales is actually the value for the dependent variable here. It's just that we're looking at it across gender. So we have a continuous independent variable, which is the year, and we have continuous dependent variable, which is total sales. So we could do that as well. So let's do all the options. So start with the bars here and added my title. I'm going to change that gap width again, and then I'm just going to put the data labels right on here. So I'm going to right click and get rid of this axis and then get rid of these grid lines as well. I think I want to move the legend. So I'm going to right click and format the legend. Let's move it to the right again. Leave it there for now and see how we feel. This width up just a tad more. Might be too much. And then right click and put those data labels right on top. That might be a little too busy for my taste. Again, it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish in your presentation. This legend could probably actually go to the left and not overlap. That would give us some more room. I think this is fine. I think in this case, because we are comparing two continuous values, so the total sales, even though they're in a category across year, that the line is a better option. However, I'm still going to copy this over. And this is the tricky part about visualization, is you do have to make some of these artistic decisions depending upon what you're looking at. Come back over and let's do that line chart. So in this case, I'm just going to use the same technique, highlight the data, go to insert and then scatter. It does give me actually the line options to start. We could have made our lives easier a little bit sooner. That's no big deal. I think I will add the lines. You want to add the straight lines because you don't want it to sort of show an interpolation within the middle. Go ahead and add our chart title again. So total coffee sales by gender. Get rid of these grid lines. Move our legend over to the right and include it in the chart. We can start this axis right at 2000. So I'm going to format the axis, make the minimum 2000 and the maximum 2008. as that is what we are focused on. And then again, I can choose to put the data labels right on. Depends again on what we're showing. I am going to adjust this axis. So I think 0 does some favors for us here. So we'll just change the max to 60,000. See what that looks like. We lost a little bit. So maybe 62,000. And we've got all the data on there. I'm going to go ahead and actually eliminate this axis and see what that looks like. Let's right click and add the data labels on both of them. We can definitely clean up the position of the data labels. That's something we should consider. I think I can also right click and format the data labels so that, let's say the label position is above, that's cleaner. And on this one, right click and let's say put it below. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. So this is pretty good, which again, I can't stress enough. It depends on what you're trying to get across. I think this gives us a starting point of comparison of both of them over time. And I like this better than the bar. It's easier on the eyes. Go ahead and copy this and paste it. Now, last and least, if for some reason we want to show just, okay, male versus female, percentage-wise, we can make a pie chart. So notice I'm just going across one category type. I'm comparing directly the number of sales, male versus female. If there were additional groups in this case shown, I could add those. So let's say we broke it up by education level. Again, I'm just looking at that one factor, education level, even if there are 5 different levels of that factor, so say high school, college, etc., I could still create a pie chart off of that that would make sense. So I do need to play around with this. I can't just take it straight from here. So we're going to have to reorganize the data a little bit before we do this. So I cannot use both year and gender at the same time. I just need a comparison of male and female. So unfortunately, to do this, all I'm going to do is sum this up. So these records here that are male, I'm going to sum up the female records. So this is my total sales by gender. I'm going to further copy this down. So I just copy the values and add these labels of male and female. And now I can just insert the pie chart. So I realize how simple this is. I'm just comparing the two categories. This is to, again, let you know, don't go crazy when doing comparisons. I'm just looking at the totals, male and female. It's done the comparison for me based on these sum values that I had. So it was a summable multi-series. I had to do the sum before I did this. Year is not included. What I don't want to do is look at how many, would that be 9 different pie charts next to one another? This line chart is going to accomplish essentially the same thing. Let's just shore this up a little bit. So I'll format the legend. Let's put this label on the right and then put some data labels on here. I can keep the number or I can add the percentage if I want. So if I right click and format the data labels, I can add that percentage. I can eliminate the value if I want. I can manipulate the text a little bit. So if I want to change colors, I'm just going to change the text color to white for both of these. So it's a little bit easier to see. Control click or just select both series, that size of text a little bit. I'd probably also increase this text size here. So very, very simple. This is about as complicated as you're going to want to get, which again, you could have more categories, but they need to be summing up to just one total, one thing. So we're just looking at total sales, male versus female, and you must have those sums to start. Go ahead and copy this over. Last example, this is another specialized example. So if you do have scientific data, you may have seen me present this data before. This is the study where they found out how many cricket chirps per second on average occurred at different temperatures. So I have a clear dependent variable here related to an independent variable. Independent variable is continuous, temperature in Fahrenheit. Dependent variable is also continuous. So I could turn this into a line, but because it's scientific, what I want to do is actually create just a scatter plot so that I can see a point. That point will have 2 pieces of data inside of it. It will have both the X and the Y. I'm going to highlight this data, go to Insert, just add that simple scatter plot. So this is a case where I'm not going to want to connect the lines, I'm going to want to add a trend line instead. So let's clean this up. First of all, let's edit this axis. So format the axis. We're dealing with interval data. We don't necessarily need 0 because we want to focus on what we're looking at. So let's increase the minimum to about 64. Go a little higher than that. 68 maybe. The maximum, let's cut that down to about 94. And let's edit this axis. So minimum, let's bring that up to say 12. You can already see how the trend starts to get better indicated when I do that. Bring it up to 13, 14, looking good. Max, let's bring that down to 20. Now I can start to really kind of see the trend. Again, since this is scientific data, it's going to be a little bit different kind of audience and different visualization. So I'm going to want both axis titles. The bottom will be explicitly giving the unit and the label for the X variable. So temperature in Fahrenheit. I can leave it like that if I want, or can add the rest of the name. This one, cricket chirps per second. And then my title for scientific data is going to be cricket chirps versus temp and Fahrenheit. So I'm really going to stress that Y versus X. I can just generally make the text bigger here so that it's more visible. And last thing I'll do, we won't get into the statistics in this course, but I will right-click the data and add a trend line. So this gives me a little bit more information. It depends on the audience. For this scientific data, we like to have the scatter plot. We like to have Y versus X, very clearly labeled units and axes, and then we can go from there. I'm going to go ahead and copy this over. So in this module, we've taken a look at the use of simple text for that high level of aggregation, taken a look at some options for tables, including the heat map, and talking about the difference between the verbal and the visual system. So verbal system slower. We have to actually read everything. We took a look at several different kinds of series and talked about if you have any categorical data that you're looking at, you may need to use that bar chart instead of that line chart. If your independent variable and your dependent variable are both continuous, you have the option of the line chart, and you can decide how you want to format those lines. So whether or not you want the data markers or not. We took a look at a categorical example, which is kind of a specialized example because it was scientific. Again, putting data labels on and eliminating the one for Earth to make it make more sense. We took a look at multi-series, in a case with continuous data, so we could stack those lines right on top of each other and see the difference. We took a look at summary records, so we compared averages across male and female. Because these categories are categorical, we can't use the line chart here, so it wouldn't make sense to connect that data. For summable multi-series, we looked at a few different options. The bar, which is a little bit busy. The line, which is preferred, because you're looking at really 3 different pieces of data here. You're looking across male and female categories, you're looking across years, and you're using total sales for both. We did touch on the pie chart briefly, which if you have to use it, make sure that pie is only representing across categories that deal with one issue. So whether it's level of education or gender, etc. Do not mix and match, say, year and gender, something like that. And then finally, we took a look at a scientific example of a scatter plot. This should hopefully at least get you started a little bit in terms of thinking more like a designer when you're creating these visuals and being able to reason as to why you like one over the other. Thinking about those differences between verbal and visual systems and going from there. There's a lot more to be done, but this is going to at least get you started. Some of these will be a little bit easier to create in Tableau, but there may be some data manipulation that's required for that as well. If you have any questions about this, please let me know.